Honourable Member for Lethbridge.
Permit me to begin by congratulating my colleague and the first female Canadian finance minister to introduce a budget in the House of Commons. Though we share opposite sides of the House, it is phenomenal, and I do want to acknowledge that. Although I am glad this government finally decided to introduce a budget after more than 2 years, it must be pointed out that we are the only country in the G7 that went this long without one. Despite the unprecedented amount of government spending that has taken place, it is only now that we are being presented with a spending plan. This, I believe, is absolutely unacceptable. It certainly doesn't speak of a government that is striving for openness, transparency, and accountability, as they often advertise. I recognize there has been a pandemic, but nearly every other government in the country, provincial and municipal, has put forward a budget during this time. If they were able to do so, then surely the Liberal government was also able to do the same. Before the budget was tabled, constituents shared with me they were hoping to see a real plan for economic recovery, for reopening society as we know it. They were hoping for a restoration of hope and confidence in our future. Those who are unemployed shared with me that they were hoping to see a plan to create new jobs and economic opportunities for their families. Those in the oil and gas sector shared with me they were hoping to see support for this world-class industry. Those who own local businesses and create jobs, they were hoping that they would no longer have to be on the verge of permanently closing their doors, that proper supports would be offered to them and that we would go back to normal. Sadly, what the Liberal government delivered, however, was a 700-page budget that will increase Canada's debt load by $1.3 trillion by 2022 and includes very little for those who call Alberta home. This is not a stimulus spending focused on creating jobs, but rather spending on Liberal partisan priorities. Although there are some necessary support measures contained in this budget for Canadians who are still getting through the economic challenges due to the pandemic, it goes well beyond what is necessary. This is like the government going to Gucci when they really should be going to Walmart. And they're not going with their own credit card, they're going with ours, the Canadian people. The deal is this: the government racks up the debt. Canadians, well, they foot the bill. A strategic budget would have targeted revenue-generating industries in our country so that $1 would turn into $3. Instead, however, we see massive amounts of cash being flushed through the country in a manner that benefits the current government's partisan interests rather than the well-being of Canadians at whole. This budget will extend the pandemic economic recession longer than is necessary due to its exorbitant spending. Canada is in a rough situation right now. People are hurting emotionally, psychologically, economically, and physically. That must be acknowledged. Canadians are looking for a way out, a change, not more of the same. Sadly, this is what this budget is: a perpetuation of our current fiscal state, where unemployment rates are high, where government handouts are a primary source of income, and where the human spirit is severely damaged. It's a superficial solution that does not fix the real problem of a struggling economy and a struggling people. This was an opportunity for the government to chart a course toward pre-COVID times. Now, of course, I would propose 2014, but that said, I'd take 2019 at this point. Instead, however, we see a Liberal government that is extending the pandemic economic recovery efforts with this budget. This will put us at a serious competitive disadvantage globally, especially when we see other countries returning to normal. Their economic engines are running again, and ours is being flooded with no hope of a jumpstart. It's hard not to be envious of countries like the United States, where concerts are taking place on Friday, sports stadiums are full on Saturdays, and churches are bustling with life on Sundays. Or Taiwan, where life is basically back to normal and has been for a long time due to their rapid response to the virus. They had a total of 1,100 cases and only 12 deaths. That's amazing. The current government seems to wear federal debt as a badge of honor. It's bizarre and troubling. More borrowing and spending does not equate to good governance. Under this Prime Minister, Canada has incurred the largest per capita deficit and hit the highest unemployment rate in the G7, which means Canada has spent the most to achieve the least. Money spent is not a measuring stick for success, as much as this government would like to use it as such. Lowering the unemployment rate or growing our national GDP, now that is something that is worth celebrating and using as a measure of success. Just a few weeks before the Liberal budget was tabled, the Deputy Prime Minister said, and I quote, "I really believe COVID has created a window of political opportunity." This mentality is truly shocking and troublesome, but it also explains how the Liberals are viewing this pandemic. They see it as an opportunity to re-engineer society according to their value set. It's exploitive and it's wrong. The Prime Minister's quote-unquote reimagined economy is a risky, Ottawa knows best approach that picks winners and losers by design. The Prime Minister is dictating which jobs, which sectors, which regions of our country will stay afloat and prosper, and which will just be left to perish. Never before has there been such a divisive Prime Minister in this nation. Canadians know the government has no money of its own. Anything the government spends comes from taxes and borrowing. What the government borrows, Canadians pay back through taxation. There's no such thing as a free lunch, regardless of how the government tries to package it. The thing about government spending is that it always comes back at a significant cost to the people. It is common knowledge that when taxes go up, it creates an unfriendly or even hostile environment for business. High taxes result in businesses leaving the country for other jurisdictions where they aren't targeted to fill government coffers via taxation. The problem with businesses leaving the country, of course, is that they take jobs with them. And when they take jobs with them, they also take revenue with them that the government relies on for social safety nets and that Canadians enjoy so much. This results in higher unemployment and more Canadians being dependent on the government for support, as opposed to being independently self-sufficient because they have a job. This pattern is extremely detrimental for the Canadian people, but it is highly beneficial for a political party that only maintains power when Canadians are dependent on government. Instead of working to get Canadians out of the dole line, it seems as though the Liberals are doing everything in their power to prolong the current situation to capitalize on an obliged and increasingly indebted electorate. So much federal money has been spent on COVID-19 benefit programs that on average, Canadians now have more personal income today than they did pre-COVID, even though the average employment income has fallen dramatically. Talk about big government. This is not a budget that a responsible government would put forward. It is a budget that sets up an opportunistic prime minister for success in the event of an election. Notably, despite the massive debt incurred, this budget failed in a few key areas. There is no plan to fight the pandemic. Now, this is interesting because the Prime Minister touted this budget as his pandemic response. There's no new money for healthcare transfers, and there's no fiscal anchor and no debt management strategy. That's atrocious for a national budget. Canada needs a Prime Minister who sees the solution to our country's current challenges and where they truly lie. It's not in the government, it's in the people. It is Canadians who are the problem solvers, the solution makers, and the wealth creators, not the government. We need a leader who sees the potential for the greatness of this nation in a free and self-sufficient people. Again, not a big, bloated government. I am grieved by the ongoing patronization of the Prime Minister and so many of his ministers when addressing Canadians as if they are weak and helpless and in need of ongoing support and handouts from the government, as if they do not have the ability in and of themselves to be a creative and strong part of the solution as we move forward. If they would only see Canadian people for what they are and let them do what they are best at doing, generating solutions, solving problems, designing equipment and technology, pursuing innovation, building businesses, creating jobs, and securing our future, then we would be headed down a much, much better path. Canadians are fair, they are reasonable, and they are generous. What they are looking for is a roadmap. They are looking for first and foremost an ethical and competent leader at the helm. And then they are looking for a plan with decisive action that is outlined, that can be measured and will be followed through on. I believe that we need to unleash the power of our workforce and let the ingenuity of the people map a course forward. Canadians want a secure future. They do not want to be handcuffed by an overwhelmingly bloated government or debt load or high taxes. Canadians deserve better than what is currently on offer, and they want to be a part of the solution moving forward.